Okay. And welcome everyone to our I-CBT Friday discussion group. And we are a group of clinicians in all different stages of learning I-CBT. If you just joined us in the middle of that conversation, you saw that demonstrated beautifully. So this has been a great space for us to learn and contribute to each other and share our knowledge with OCD providers worldwide. So I really thank you for being here and being a part of that. My name is Mary Hosbrough, and I'm one of the co-facilitators for the Friday discussions that happen every Friday for our clinicians group at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And starting today, we're going to start a series of panel discussions, mostly focusing on how to use I-CBT, each of the modules with clients. And typically the panels will be like 2 or 3 panelists sharing a bit of how they use each module with a mixture of like conversation between the panelists and questions and discussions from the rest of us. And today we're going to start that off, but we have 5 panelists. So I'm just going to turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves and then let them roll right into their discussion. They're going to be discussing how to introduce I-CBT to clients. And as questions come up, you can just use your raise hand button, or if you don't know how to do that, it's under reactions. I'll try to kind of scan and see if I see hands raised and point them out to the panelists. They said they would be willing to just take questions and have it just kind of be an organic discussion. So thanks so much. And I'll turn it over to Bronwyn and Teresa and Carl and Gina and whoever else is my 5th panelist.
Katie.
It's me.
Yes, Katie.
Who wants to start, guys? Me? Oh man. All right, I'll start. So I'm Gina Abbondante. I'm a LCSW in New Jersey. I specialize in anxiety disorders and OCD in the pregnant and postpartum population. And I was introduced to I-CBT a few years ago by Robbins.
Weren't we all? I will go next. My name is Katie Merritt. I am an LCSW in Connecticut. I specialize in treating OCD with multiple modalities. I too had the bug put in my ear by Robbins, I think through Mike Hetty, actually. So I consider Carl to be my grand mentor.
I'll go next. I'm Bronwyn Shroyer, and I am an LCSW in Indiana. I treat OCD and trauma. And I too am here learning I-CBT because of Carl and Mike. And I'm happy to be here with you today.
I guess I can go next. I'm Teresa. Last name is Chiu. I'm an LCSW in Washington State, and I'm also an LCSW in Pennsylvania. And I specialize in treating OCD. My practice is fully dedicated to treating OCD. I have OCD myself, and I also work with clients who I want to support clients who also feel that their identities are important in their treatment, and I bring in intersectionality and mostly work with LGBTQIA+ and neurodivergent autistic and ADHD folks.
I am Carl Robbins, the Pied Piper, apparently. I stumbled on IBA at that time, IBT, in a book by Vanderkerk. And like many people, when I first saw it, I immediately rejected it because it sounded like arguing with with obsessions, and particularly that you can actually have certainty, and it sort of violated everything I knew about OCD at the surface, so I rejected it. And then I took a second and third look, and then I will tell you, this is probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I went to the original IBA website and look for clinicians in the United States. There was one person in the United States, a guy named Bob Safian. I don't know if Bob is here. And so it's just been amazing what's happened, and to a large extent driven by Mary and the facilitators here, as well as the other panelists have really, and Mike Heddy have really, under Fred's leadership and guidance, have really sort of made this an amazing experience. We're coming up on 1,000 members of the group. And I will also say, I'm a person with a lived experience, and very often the first I-CBT client is yourself. And that was certainly true for me. And I will tell you that there was this sort of quantum shift in my own recovery in terms of something that previous understandings, previous models of OCD just couldn't take me to that level. And I would say that it coincided the same time that I was reading a lot of Michael Greenberg's work. And while it certainly is a different model, I think that both approaches created a sense of agency that were not accessible to a large extent in the cognitive appraisal model or the behavior model, and fundamentally in the way in which obsessions are understood and how to respond to obsessions. So, which I think then leads us into, so how do you introduce this to clients?
So how do you introduce this to clients?
Well, okay, I'll start. I think it's really important, because most of us coming to this work have already been steeped in other models. So it's important to have a map in your own mind of how you normally introduce this stuff to clients. And in the past, right, with the cognitive appraisal model and the behavior model, and even using ACT, we sort of immediately go right to the tail end of the elephant. And I would say all models are looking at the elephant, and one way of looking at it is that we are used to looking at the tail end of the elephant, which is the obsession and the compulsion and the interaction there, right? And then also how an intrusion, what's called an intrusion, that the appraisal that leads to the problem. That's what we're all used to. And very often we will have clients that are also steeped in that model, right? Most of us rarely get sort of virgin clients, right? That they've already been sort of understanding OCD in that way from their own reading, from previous work with other therapists, from using ERP. So it's important to sort of understand where you are. And so, one way of looking at it is that we're looking at the same elephant, but rather than looking at the tail, we're going to look at the front of the elephant. And we're going to look at, actually, if we slow things down, what we find is that what we call obsessions, rather than just being sort of common, unwanted, intrusive thoughts that pop up that everybody deals with, actually, when we slow this down, we find out that there's a whole process that leads up to the obsession. And that we can intervene there. But it begins with sort of really understanding an entire story that we can come up with quite automatically. And that understanding the process by which we come up with that story can make a huge difference in how we end up eventually getting caught up in either avoidances or compulsions. But rather than looking there, we're going to look further upstream or at the front of the elephant, to mix metaphors here. Who's next?
I'll go next. When I introduce I-CBT to a client, I will say that now I have way more experience with I-CBT than I do with ERP at this point in my career. And I feel the most competent with I-CBT. So that's usually what I start with, not just because I feel more confident in it, but also because I find it gives us a much more complete picture of what the process is for an obsession. Because like Carl said, with an appraisal-based model, we're only looking at one piece of this sequence, or two pieces rather. We're looking at the anxiety, and we're looking at the compulsion, and we're missing everything else that comes before this part of the sequence. And so I'm also in recovery from OCD, as many of you know, and I teach from a lens of lived experience, that I-CBT was the thing for me. That was this light bulb that made me go, whoa, there's a why, there's a how. It's not just let's go and get you stressed on purpose and then don't do your compulsions, right? So I like to tell my clients that there's a whole sequence that's happening before we even get to the point of doing a compulsion that through other lenses of treatment we might have missed. And it's really, really, really important to address how you're being hooked, why you're being hooked. Because I like to say that I am terminally nosy and very curious, and I need to know, right? I want to know why was I still having these obsessions? Why was I still having these thoughts? Why was it this thing and not that thing? Why didn't I give a shit about washing my hands and germs, right? Why didn't I care about checking logs? And so the thing that really made sense to me with I-CBT is like, we can tell you why, we can show you why, we can show you how you're being hooked. So when I introduce this to clients, I like to say this is a capital C cognitive behavioral therapy. That the doing follows from knowing, right? And we're the target here is we're going to change the way that you think about this thing by pulling back the curtain on the OCD, by seeing the machinations so that you can see what's happening. You can have that knowledge of, and then you can choose whether or not to engage in the obsession. And that is the thing for me personally that restored my agency in my recovery. Because when I really knew and I really believed that this obsession is bullshit, right? This is crap. This is shit that I've made up, that I'm responding to as if it's actually happening. That's a problem that we're not addressing with ERP. And when I knew that, I could make an informed decision to no longer go down that rabbit hole, to no longer engage with the obsession, and to just drop it and carry on with my life. Right? Not get stressed on purpose, not sit with uncertainty, none of that. By understanding that there was certainty before I got hooked, I could stay there, right? I could stay in the certainty instead of following the doubt down the rabbit hole. And that's what I like to tell my clients. We're going to pull back the machinations of OCD so that you can see exactly what's happening, and then you can choose what you want to do with this information. Do you want to go further into the bubble? Is anything going to be solved if you do that? Right? And it's such this beautiful restoration of agency that like Carlson, I really did not feel that I got from other treatment approaches, right? So when I like to tell my clients that we're gonna help them restore trust. You're gonna learn to trust yourself. You're gonna learn to trust your senses. You're gonna learn to stop outsourcing the trust to the disorder. That's what's disrupting your functioning. right? And we're going to get you back to being as close to not having OCD as we could possibly can with I-CBT. And then if we don't get you there with I-CBT, we can do some adjunctive work. We can do some ACT, we can do some mindfulness, we can even do ERP if you want. I'm not dogmatic. I don't like to say that I am solely an I-CBT practitioner. I'm an OCD practitioner. And so I pull things from anywhere that I can to help clients. But I always start through an I-CBT framework because I feel like that is the most complete picture of what's happening within the realm of OCD. That's my spiel.
Katie, can I ask you a question? How
Yeah.
much do you use your own experience when you're introducing it?
I do. When I have that first intake call, it's in my profile on Psychology Today that I have lived experience. And so I like to tell them that, like, hey, you know what? ACT and ERP were really great for me. They got me about 60% of the way. And then I-CBT elevated that because it let me understand and gave me a more complete picture of what was happening, which gave me the agency to choose to disengage. Because there's this beautiful quote in the manual that I think it says that doing follows from knowing, right? And when you know, you choose what to do.
I see Erica also has a question.
Yeah, I thought this question might be relevant for those of us who are newish to I-CBT. So I'm a psychologist and I'm in Texas. I'm focused on anxiety and OCD in kids and teens. And I've got some young adult clients as well. But as I'm doing a few I-CBT cases with my clients, who, especially those, like Carl said, who have been through other forms of treatment, I often get the question of, well, what am I going to do with these obsessions? And I usually respond with something along the lines of what y'all were describing, like, we're going to learn where they come from so that we can manage them from a different point on this chain. But I'm wondering more about the language that y'all use to describe and really convince clients that understanding where it comes from and the reasoning that gets you there is more effective than I've got this obsession and I have to do something with it. I think that's where I'm getting stuck with sort of convincing clients that I-CBT can be really helpful, which it has been.
I can give my spiel at my answer that question for you. So I'm also lived experience practitioner. And I guess main points, not to just repeat Katie and Carl, I'll try to do a couple different things. So one thing that I'm finding incredibly useful in introducing I-CBT is having my clients just do the ICQ, the inferential confusion questionnaire. And as you do that at the beginning of treatment, before I've even talked about treatment options, what I'm finding is clients say, oh my gosh, I spend so much time in my imagination. Oh my word, this sounds just like me. Oh my gosh, what's happening here? Why do I do this all the time? It starts to get them thinking in a different way without you even having to explain I-CBT to them at all. So that's one thing that I would suggest. The other thing, I, like Katie and Carl, I wasn't a treatment success for ERP. So it got me out and functioning, but it wasn't my gold standard. And so when clients are coming to see me, often they do know that I have lived experience. And when I have a client that's coming to me with an ERP background, I start there. Like, so I'm going to explain, here's how OCD looked in that model to you, right? And we go through the cycle, right? You've got these intrusive thoughts that come for people with OCD, they like do an appraisal of that thought, it causes anxiety. Then you've got this compulsion that's going to help you relieve that anxiety temporarily. And then you're back to it all, right? You're going to come right back to that thought. So we go through and explain what they've kind of already learned in ERP. And then I explain the differences that I-CBT is going to bring. So in that, I start to talk, really, I kind of go to module 2 first. I'll say, and I mean, not as I'm teaching it, but just in this intro, just for a tiny little bit of a explanation for where ICBT is going to go. And I talk about, when you have an obsession come up, there's probably good reasons behind that for you, right? And that validates them immediately, builds rapport with them immediately, because people with OCD are not stupid people. They have incredibly good reasons to believe the things that they believe. And when we ignore that, it's incredibly invalidating, which was one of the major things that I did not like about my treatment pre-ICBT. It was very dismissive. And so when I start that way, they'll say, yeah, like I believe these things for all these reasons. And I say, okay, great. There's nothing wrong with any of that logic that you have, but how you're applying it is getting you caught up. And what ICBT is going to do is teach you how you are getting caught up in the process by using that reasoning out of context. And then I offer them, which route do you want to go? Do you want to continue doing ERP or do you want to do ICBT? I have yet to have somebody tell me that they want to do ERP only. I've had some people say, I still don't want to stop doing exposures. I still want to kind of do my response prevention, but I want to learn ICBT. And never has someone said to me, they don't want to go that route. Because I'm telling you, when you have OCD, ICBT just kind of, I don't know, there's something about it. That's why there's so many clinicians within this group who also have OCD. Like there is something about learning ICBT through an OCD brain that just makes sense. So I don't know if that helps you, Erica, but I do the logic piece as the piece that usually leads into the ICBT discussion.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because I know a lot of my clients with that ERP background do feel very similarly. So understanding that your logic makes sense. Your logic is logical. It's just the application of that logic.
Right. There's nothing wrong with their logic. There's nothing wrong with people's perceptions. There's nothing wrong with any of it. And that takes so much shame away right away too, because you're helping someone know that their intelligence, there's nothing wrong with it. Germs do exist. Robberies do happen. You're not stupid for believing those things. It's okay that you do. It's just in this moment, right in front of you, that's when you're misapplying that information.
Bronwyn, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
First, I want to thank you for such an incredibly bright and simple way to present that to clients. It made a lot of sense to me, and it was very informative. I wonder if when you present the two options that you discuss how there's a story that makes sense, if you make allocations differently for different presentations of OCD. Like that, what you explained, it kind of makes a lot of sense. It is very clear moving forward in contamination, harm, but something like, for instance, like just right OCD, I just wonder if you make accommodations for that in a different way to present that.
Oh, just right OCD. It's so complicated. Yeah, I mean, you could move that and whatever. I mean, at this point, when I'm introducing, like, I don't necessarily have a total picture of that person's like themes. I don't really get into tons of subtype work because I see OCD through the vulnerable self-theme lens now. I don't really see it through like relationship OCD or whatever OCD. But yeah, I would pull an example if that is helpful to that client. So if they say, well, what about this stuff? Then yeah, I would pull examples from whatever they're dealing with. Yeah.
And then I'm also wondering if Gina or Teresa still have things that they would like to share about how they introduce ICBT to clients.
Sure, I'll go. So I also have lived experience, so I can talk about this from my own experience. I also have an interesting thing where a lot of the clients that I work with, because I work with perinatal and postpartum clients, a lot of them tend to have rapid onset after the baby's born, and they're postpartum or either during pregnancy. So I actually do get a fair amount of OCD virgin, so to speak, where they either didn't know they had OCD or they have not gone through treatment at all. So how I introduce this to clients actually is a little bit different because I don't give a whole lot of narrative about the different approaches. I conceptualize their OCD from the beginning from the I-CBT lens, because it just makes sense. If I was to tell someone who was pregnant or postpartum that their thoughts didn't matter, I think they would walk out, because their thoughts do matter, and it matters according to the most important thing in their life, which is their baby. So I always now, I conceptualize it for them from the very beginning from the I-CBT lens. And I just sort of pepper it in. And at some point, someone might ask me, once I talk to them about what I think is going on for them. They might, go home and do some research, hopefully not compulsively, but they'll ask me, like, are we doing exposure and response prevention? And then I might delve into, well, you know what, I sort of combine them in certain ways where we're going to go really heavy on the response prevention part. And for me, I tend to see I-CBT as like the ultimate in response prevention. So we're going to go really heavy on that response prevention part. And exposures, we're going to do functional exposures that are based on your everyday life. We are not going to intentionally set out to do these wild things that you would never do in your everyday life. You're going to have to change your baby. You're going to have to make bottles. You're going to have to do X, Y, and Z things that are probably going to trigger your doubt, but you still have to do them. So we're going to really work on this response prevention piece and working on the narrative and the story and the doubt and all of those things. So I take a little bit of a very different approach just based on the populations that I work with. For my particular life, I have the lovely blend of having panic disorder and OCD. And for my most recent flare up of it, which was, oh my gosh, like 5 years ago now, I did ERP, and it definitely took the edge off of the panic disorder, but it made my OCD significantly worse. In particular, imaginal scripts sent me to the moon, so I couldn't do them. And I would have been considered a treatment failure. And that's where I-CBT really stepped in and helped me to answer that question of why, which I think is so important, especially for the clients that I work with. People want to know, why am I having these horrible obsessions and taboo thoughts and violent thoughts about my kids or my loved ones? Like, that matters to them. And that's where I think I-CBT really shines, that it allows them to answer those questions why and get clarity, as opposed to your brain is giving you junk mail, which is the most diminishing thing I think we have ever heard. So I take a little bit of a different approach where I don't give a whole lot of information about the various modalities that I use, because ultimately I don't think clients really care. As long as they're going to get better, you can slap whatever acronym on it. As long as they're going to get better, I don't think they really care what it is that we're doing. If they can use it and it helps and they're getting better, that's really all they care about.
Thanks, Gina. Teresa, did you have something you wanted to share about how you introduce I-CBT?
Sure, yeah. So as I mentioned in my intro, I work with a lot of clients who are autistic and also who identify as like ADHDers. And so for me, I try to bring visuals in, and I think that really helps just for my brain too, to explain things. And so I like to really try to bring in like non-absolute language as well. Because I think that hearing the stories of other people with OCD and lived experience, I'm really trying to show that there are multiple ways for people to feel better. And even though I-CBT resonated for me and resonates for me as a clinician and in my conceptualization, I really am coming through that lens because I do see OCD differently than a phobia, and I do see OCD differently than generalized anxiety. And so when I talk to clients about I-CBT, I really just let them know it's one of many options. I don't talk about it as the only option or the right one, or that ERP isn't the right one. I just really kind of show them that there's lots of ways that we can feel better from OCD, and there's lots of opinions about how we do that. And I'm going to try to find theirs with them. And that's kind of how I introduce it. And I do think that the easiest way that I've been able to show this so far is I just pulled up the I-CBT website. Can you guys see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so I pull it up because then this will be a familiar website for my clients later on when I'm not with them, and they can see the website, and then I just show them, I click on what is I-CBT, because they might want to come back and read this without me later on, because it's a lot of information in session at first. And I show them the website, and I just scroll down and I say, these are some different options. These aren't all the options for treating OCD, but these are some pretty common ones. And so I give them the visual, and I just kind of explain to them a little bit about, like, if they're familiar with ERP, like they've done some behavior work down here. And, you know, if they've done some kind of more appraisal model work, maybe they've done some, you know, looking at their overestimation of threat and things like that. And so I just kind of show them this, and I say, you know, all of these are working hard to help us feel better with OCD. I prefer as a clinician to start off with I-CBT, at least the first several models, maybe up till or modules up to module 4, because to me that's going to help me get an idea. I like that they're going to be tracking their sequence, and I kind of explain that to them that, you know, we're gonna learn about their OCD, and if we start off with I-CBT, I feel like I'm still getting all the information I need to even provide ERP later as well, because the first module of I-CBT, they're going to be tracking their symptoms. And but I feel like this is going to give me an idea of their obsessional doubt, and then I can also, you know, go through the first several modules for them. Module 2 is great for us to kind of explore if there's trauma, right? And so I feel like eventually I can use ERP with clients, even if I start with I-CBT. So I just kind of let them know, like, this is my preference as a clinician, because I feel like it's going to give them like the details that come before the obsession. And the behavior model kind of puts the obsession as just an obsession, and it focuses really on the compulsions. And so if the client says, well, I'm really familiar with ERP and I'd like to continue that, like, that's a restart. And, you know, this gives them an idea of what their options are, because these are the treatments I provide, so they get to kind of see that. And I also like to bring in Dr. Clark's picture here, and I just kind of give them a heads up that, you know, we're going to assess as we go, but it gives them an idea of the differences between OCD and routines that are values-based, like also like stimming and regulating, and then ADHD. And so they kind of get a visual that we might get into OCD treatment and find out that this is actually something that isn't a compulsion. So we might not even use I-CBT. Maybe they're wanting more support with like being neurodivergent in a neurotypical space, right? Like self-acceptance and stuff like that. So I do bring this image in when I'm introducing my work. And so I wanted to share this in case some of you guys are also working with folks who are autistic or ADHDers. And again, coming back to when I talk about I-CBT and ERP, I really try to imagine that if none of that treatment worked, like, it could feel bad for the client that I said that I-CBT would be their jam, right? And so I try to keep that in mind, that, you know, these are just some treatments, and if they don't work for them, then our field needs to continue to try to find what's going to work for them.
Teresa, you're still sharing your screen, I think. Thanks. And thank you for that introduction of how you introduce it to clients. I love that variety. Then at this point, if we've heard from all the panelists, like if the panelists have things they want to comment to each other, that's great. Or if there are more questions from the rest of us, we can just take questions and discussions and just kind of see what comes up for us as we process this together.
I had another question because I know that some of the folks on this panel also work with our younger kids and teens. And I've had some success in introducing these concepts to kids and teens, but I'm also wondering about kind of what you consider before jumping into these metacognitive ideas with our younger clientele, and also some of the strategies that you have found useful, or any, like, I know I have Bronwyn's lovely I-CBT kids slides, but some of the ways that you can describe these to either younger clients or their parents that have proven effective.
For kids that are under 13, I have parents sit in on all the sessions, so they're learning things alongside. I think that's really important, just so they have the same language and all of that going on. I like to talk about the imagination and how awesome it is. And that we're using it in good ways when we're doing all these like make-believe and all the great childhood things. And that sometimes our imaginations can get hijacked, and then we're using it in a way to scare us and make us feel yucky. So that I find that kids with I-CBT, it makes sense. Like, I mean, they're in their imagination so much anyway. With teens, I don't really change too much when I work with teens. It's more just like getting on a teenage level, making sure that rapport building is super strong. But I don't really change too much. And I kind of vacillate between the adult stuff and the kid stuff when I'm working with teens. So I don't know if I have much more to add into that. Teresa also works with younger ones. She might have something. Do you have something there, Teresa?
Yeah, sorry, I was reading the comments. I hope this isn't redundant, but I definitely talk to parents and kiddos about how I-CBT is not evidence-based yet for kids. And I give them that heads up because they deserve to know that we don't have research on that yet. And you know, they can make a decision if they want to proceed. I have not yet had anyone say they don't want to do I-CBT because it's not evidence-based for kids. But some people do feel very strongly about that in our field. Like, other professionals feel that we should always start where there is research. So, you know, I feel like I feel very strongly that sufferers and families and other clinicians and everyone deserves to know that there's multiple ways, right? Like, I want that transparency. That's a big piece of my advocacy, is I want us to really kind of start thinking about how we have communicated about OCD treatment very factual about one model. I hope that we can continue to shift out of that and use language that is much more inviting to new modalities. That's what we want. Like, we should be excited about this, right? Like, we should be excited that we have more and more options. And I think that we're going to help our field and help sufferers be more open to that if we can kind of change the language that we use and how we communicate about new treatments or other treatments. There is importance in clients knowing that, right? I've shared this in smaller circles, but I do get emails from people all over the world telling me that they have not done OCD treatment because they were not going to do ERP, and they thought, based on what they've heard, that ERP is the only effective option. And so they have gone decades with no treatment because they didn't think anything else would be worth their time or money. So people are waiting to hear about other options, and we can be part of that change.
This is just a really small distinction, but I-CBT is not considered metacognitive. It's based in reality and in the here and now. So it is cognitive in nature, but not as much like metacognitive is the thinking about thinking. In I-CBT, we're not thinking about thinking, we're thinking about what's real and like developing that trust. So I think with kids, I don't work with kids, but I have 2 small kids, and they are the most concrete human beings. If they see something, that's their reality. So I think I-CBT can really align quite well with just where they are developmentally anyway. So I think it could be, and I've used a couple of the techniques. I was my own I-CBT first patient, but now my kids are, so there's that. And I've used some of the techniques a bit with my own children, and they get it. Like they get it. Oh, it's my imagination. It's not really happening here. Like it just clicks for them. So I think that it can be a really, really impressive modality for them.
I have a question that I think will probably be directed at Teresa, but anyone could feel free to answer. But Teresa, I'm thinking about how if you are open to doing ERP or I-CBT based on what's best fit for the client and their preferences, how do you navigate if someone really wants to do imaginal exposures? And particularly, I get people who say that has helped me in the past, but then it can be tricky to navigate holding that space and like, this is a model that this can be helpful, and this is a model and this can be helpful, but even because there is some conflict there.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I am pretty vocal and outspoken about my concerns with using imaginal exposures, because a lot of sufferers, that is the problem for them. They're not having a phobic response to imagining the catastrophe. They are actually doing that compulsively. And the more time we spend in the imagination, the way I describe it is we're adding words to the book of doubt, and that's kind of the way that I explain it to my clients is like, we can add words to the book of real, or we can add words to the book of doubt. Which book are we going to read? But there are times when OCD sufferers are having some phobic responses. And I think that that's a perfect time to do some ERP, even if I'm doing I-CBT. And Gina talked about this a little bit too, is like, sometimes clients are avoiding and they're engaging in avoidance behaviors, and they need to get back to doing things that they need to be doing. And so if someone really is afraid of certain words, we might do a script. If someone is also having an anxiety disorder, and not just OCD, because I see these two differently. There's like bits and pieces of anxiety disorders that are not going to really, we might have to modify I-CBT. So I-CBT is for OCD. And there are parts of OCD that are like, OCD is 100% irrelevant. We can't use certain modules in the I-CBT treatment for some anxiety disorders, because not all anxiety disorders are 100% irrelevant, out of context logic being used. And so I will use imaginal exposures for phobic responses.
Mm-hmm.
And I explain to the client, and I always do them in session. I don't send anyone home with imaginal exposures for the first time, because guess what? If you do an imaginal exposure and the person believes that nightmare, I think you could be running into some problems. So I always test it first in session, and I ask the client, I do a little bit of inhibitory learning, like, what surprised you about that? And they're like, well, I feel like a piece of shit. Well, we're not doing that for homework. Okay, they're believing that nightmare. That to me, that's not a successful exposure practice. So I test run that in session before I send it home for homework, and depending on how their belief process unfolds after that. So I'm assessing that before I send it home. And it's not too often that I do imaginal exposures, but I will for phobias.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Jeremy?
Thanks. So I wanted to bring up something about the autism stuff that I incorporate into my introduction of I-CBT. And it does not need to be only an I-CBT. I really think you can use this in introducing ERP as well. But the model of ERP where nothing matters except for the basic learning principles doesn't really allow for this. But so here's a piece of how I introduce it. So in autism, we often see confusing experiences, either sensory experiences that are a lot more extreme, social experiences that don't seem to make sense, preferences that other people don't seem to understand. And autistic folks get a lot of pushback about those differences and told you need to act more mainstream, you need to act more neurotypical and mask and make any disability or difference invisible, and that's how you're going to recover. And so when they come to a place trying to treat their OCD who's going to use ERP and who's not going to really listen to the story behind their preferences, then it can feel like more of that, more of no, you got to just ignore these things that are really uncomfortable for you. And we use this inhibitory learning language in ERP often to say, it doesn't matter if your distress goes down. Well, no one wants to live in a highly distressing environment all the time. There's probably some middle ground between accommodation and well, accommodation has a middle ground. It shouldn't be just one person or the other's preferences are getting met. And so what I like in the introduction of I-CBT is that you can say, there's a number of ways that, like, I'm not going to ask you to change. These are your own personal preferences that are going to come out. And some of the explaining of your preference, your need for routine or something like that, is other providers have said, this is just like a symptom. This is something that you need to get rid of. I'm going to say that maybe that's a need. And as we're going to go into this treatment, there's a whole module about explaining the reasons. And we're going to talk about how there might be some like obsessional narratives in here that really are not being pulled out of the here and now, and they're just what ifs that I don't have to worry about. And then there's also a number of things that really are meaningful to you. And what I like about I-CBT is that it's going to give us plenty of space to explore what your reasons are for what a compulsive behavior might be. And so we're going to get, in some ways, like a better functional analysis out of exploring that. So yes, it's going to validate their experience and not make them go run for the hills. It's going to say, no, we're not doing coercive therapy here. I'm going to take your perspective to be the truth. And it's also going to enhance my ability to understand, like, what out of this might desensitize and what's the function of you doing these things. If it's not going to desensitize, maybe there's a very regulatory function for this behavior. It's not compulsive because it's not part of a narrative that that doesn't really address what your obsessional fear is. There's something real in the here and now that you are soothing through this behavior. So that becomes part of my selling of I-CBT to some autistics clients, is just to bring up that we're going to have plenty of space for those sorts of differences that might have been swept under the rug and just labeled OCD when we take a strict behavioral approach.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I hope that you develop a training for all of us based on that and teasing those out.
I'm getting there. I've had some time to work on it. I'm close. Yes.
Hurry up.
Sorry.
Amy?
Hi. I'm so excited to be able to attend these. I had a course that I was taking last semester, like a business course, and I was busy every single Friday. So I'm glad to be here. This is really helpful for me because I think like one of the primary places that I've been struggling with I-CBT, and I just put something on the Facebook group to this effect, is this idea about, for me, authentically, as somebody with lived experience with OCD and as somebody with ADHD, like my style as a therapist is not varied to maintain my authenticity as a therapist and as a human being with the brain that I have. I tend not to, despite my training being in very like evidence-based manualized treatments of like, here's a module, here's a module, here's a module. The type of therapy that I do has never been tethered to like a particular workbook, right? Or a particular set of worksheets or things like that, which I think is okay in any model. But I think what's been hard for me in integrating I-CBT is it's kind of like to go back to what you said earlier, Carl, about the elephant, is how are there ways to sort of introduce things and say like, here's like the whole ass elephant. And here's like the parts over here we're going to talk about. And here are the parts over here. And also knowing that with the CBT triangle, you know, we don't have to talk about the primacy necessarily of like cognition before behavior or before affect. Like that's, you know, but we can sort of play around with that. be playful about, you know, I am shocked when I hear that I don't know, many ERP therapists aren't talking about the whys. You know, it's one thing to say this is junk mail for your head. It's another thing to say, yeah, you know, there are these, you're inundated with all these thoughts, and the ones that are really sticky, here's why they're really sticky, and to get that buy-in. So I guess what I'm saying is, I feel like this has been helpful for me because I'm hearing, especially Gina, when you were talking, I'm hearing ways that I-CBT is being integrated into a more sort of like, I don't know, more eclectic approach, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm glad to finally be able to be here.
We're glad you're with us too.
Can I respond to thank you, Amy, and you know, I'm really glad that you're joining us, and you know, I followed your work for a long time and found it really helpful, and so I will tell you that when you really understand the role of the imagination in OCD, when it changes the way that you do exposures fundamentally, right? And that the way that I think about exposures now, and ERP is not inconsistent with I-CBT, but what I'm really encouraging people to do is to face your triggers and stay in reality. Notice when you're crossing the bridge, getting lost in the obsessional story, to catch the crossover point while you're facing your triggers and come back. And there are different ways of sort of describing this five senses experiencing, right? Recognizing the reasoning errors or whatever. But my goal fundamentally is not to lean into the uncertainty, to imagine the worst case scenario, to tolerate the anxiety. None of that, right? That's all about sort of, you know, basically, you know, and this is where I think this, you know, integration is fine, eclecticism is fine, but there are these choice points when you got to decide, right? You know, what is the discrimination that you want your patients to have? And for me, it's staying anchored in reality.
Mm-hmm. I hear that, and I feel like that's fundamentally what exposures can be, is sort of like I'm here, I'm doing this thing, and sort of the scales are falling from my eyes. And if there's any leftover, well, but it could be this, it could be that. To me, that's tolerating the sort of leftovers of uncertainty, that the crumbs that we all have in any decision that we make. And I think for some people, that's more or less, for me in my experience, for some people, integrating in that sort of like, you know, the leftover uncertainty can be helpful. But I agree with you. And I think, like, I use the word exposure for like doing the things that you want to do that you haven't done. I realize that I have used that word, and it's been more and more divorced over time from the traditional notion of do a really hard thing on purpose to feel crappy and come out on the other side, because that's not what anybody wants. It's not what I want. So thank you.
And Nicole.
Hello, this is my first any kind of I-CBT discussion outside of just kind of initial learning steps. So first of all, I'm very happy to be here, and I might flub up the language in terms of how this works, but I have found, I really feel like, yes, this I-CBT makes a lot of sense. I was an ERP therapist. Now I would consider myself more globally an OCD therapist. And so I'm finding I have to do the translation. It's like English as a second language, but some of the ideas and concepts within I-CBT click so well that it almost feels like that's the language I'm trying to translate then into ERP. And I almost feel like weird about it. I don't know if you guys know what I mean, but I'll be doing ERP and I'll be like, oh, I feel like this makes more sense from an I-CBT lens. And so I've been introducing it to clients in terms of, I'm learning, it's going to be clunky, but if you have an interest in learning along with me, I think it makes sense. Particularly if I've had them for a considerable chunk of time and they've made some progress, but I think that there's room for growth. And so I'm kind of balancing the not wanting to jump in too quickly and shift gears if we're just getting in the lane of ERP, but also feeling like ERP was everything until I heard about I-CBT and started to really digest some of the bits of I-CBT of what I know so far. And I've gone, oh, like, I don't want to just reject what I know, but it's kind of a harder balance for me to wrestle with. So I try to make that very transparent to the clients, because it's a huge ass shift in terms of how you're integrating it into treatment. And so it's been an interesting process. It's almost harder for me to start with a client just from an I-CBT lens, because I'm so used to going, this is how we would understand it in ERP. But this also makes a lot of sense in being able to prevent that whole elephant, versus people going, I don't even know about an elephant. I'm just terrified I'm going to, kill somebody. And so just trying to kind of navigate that has been an interesting process. I have a number of ASD clients as well, and I have ASD children. And I've found that they've actually clicked with the integration of the concepts very well. We very much, approach treatment with any client, neurodiversity or otherwise, that if you have a particular stimming or regulatory strategy that brings you a sense of that internal regulation, like, I don't want to take that from you. In fact, I want to create a value-driven opportunity for you to re-engage with that, so that when you are stimming, you're getting the actual regulatory comfort out of it, versus the distress that comes along with compulsively engaging in that act. And I'm getting the thumbs up from Jeremy, but so I often, even if I know there's neurodiversity present, I will say, what are your stems, so that I can be aware of that. And we can have tools available to you if you want to stem, but we can also, in the same way, we can look at hand washing or prayers for somebody in their religious tradition, how that can get scrupulous, or that can get a compulsive around contamination. We also want to know where that line is of it's actually bringing you comfort, it's giving you sensory input, versus this is really, I guess in the I-CBT language, gone over the bridge to compulsory, and it's not serving you in that way anymore. So those were also just some thoughts. I'm by no means an expert on ASD, but I feel like I understand it. I understand treatment, I think, with my ASD folks a little better than the neurotypical people. And yeah, exactly, Jeremy. I feel like I'm vibing with you there. So those are some of my thoughts. And also how to talk to other clinicians. I think this is probably the bigger problem. Clients, every single client I've even thought out loud about I-CBT with, I've been like, yeah, let's do this. Let's learn more. It's other therapists that have zoomed in and waited on waiting lists for a BTTI and done all these different things, invested lots of money and a lot of their life, and they do good work, that are like, what, like, this is bullshit. Like, I don't even want to consider it. And so I found that being more of the, how do I talk to my other therapists about it? Because I still do believe in ERP. I believe in the work that I've done up until this point, and it's been good. It has been good. It's just not good for everybody. So,
And that's where podcasts like yours fill a void.
Thank you. So, and thank you, because Mike, you were my introduction into this world, as well as Angie McDaniel, if you guys know her. We were in a BTTI together, and she said, hey, I-CBT, I'm learning, but it makes a lot of sense. Clients are really jiving with it. And I thought she was crazy when she first introduced that to me. But I wanted to learn, because I believe there is one way to solve a problem. So thank you for that. And thank you for Mike filling in some of those gaps. It's literally the only foundation I have thus far, but I am interested and looking forward to learning more. So thank you.
Sweet. Well, that does bring us to the top of the hour. Does anyone have any final quick comments before we go?
Just because there's so many first-time people here, I wanted to share this one quick thing that about certainty versus uncertainty, as Carl was saying. We want to be able to trigger, but then like stay certain, basically. Like the difference that it was in one of these Zoom meetings that I heard this, someone said, it's the difference between tolerating that maybe my spouse is cheating on me and I have to go to bed every night, like wondering, but not having enough evidence to accuse them, versus feeling loved and accepted and comfortable and with my partner. Like that amount of certainty is certainly something that we should care about and not just dismiss and say everyone accepts uncertainty as we do this. It's a worthwhile goal to feel that level of trust.
Yeah, I think I'd like to do a parting one out on that too, is, that having OCD, so for those of you who are new to me, 30-year journey, and having to just tolerate thinking that I'm going to accidentally harm my loved ones for 30 years. I mean, I could cry. Like it's hell. Why would we want that for our clients? I-CBT gave me certainty. I'm 100% certain that I'm never going to hurt my kids. Like, why would we want that?
Additionally, people without OCD don't do that.
Right.
They don't go, maybe I will murder my kids and maybe I won't. Guess I'll never find out. Time to go to sleep. Nobody does that. It's why would I coach someone with OCD and say, yep, this is what people without OCD do. We might tolerate uncertainty about what are my test results going to be? Did I get an A on this test? Am I going to get into this college? That's fine. That's natural uncertainty, but we're not going to teach our clients to tolerate obsessional doubts. There's no reason to, there's no functional reason to pursue that.
No, and we're not telling our clients that we're going to promise them certainty in life. We're just promising that we're going to help guide them towards the potential for certainty within their OCD.
Right.
And that is a game changer, y'all. So thank you for being here and learning I-CBT, because if you can give that to your client, I can promise you that is a huge lift of quality of life for them and their family who has watched them suffer and who they have probably caused some problems with too, right? Because when you're in the bubble, you're not the nicest person in the world.
No.
And that gives you all kinds of guilt. So
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, it's wonderful.
And next week we'll delve into have a new panel with how to use module 1 with clients. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.